Nick Marricco. I'm one of the education associates at Tully Rinky. And as Taylor discussed, what we're going to talk about today are sort of like the ins and outs for your child's evaluation. When you should request an evaluation, how do you request an evaluation, and should you request an updated evaluation? These are very critical parts of the special education process because if you're familiar with what an IEP is, the IEP is, well, it's supposed to be. The school districts tend to do whatever they want sometimes, but the IEP is based on the results of the evaluation. And there is state law and federal law that require the school districts to consider the results of all of your child's most recent evaluations. So you need the proper evaluations in order to properly advocate for your child. And as an attorney, and I've discussed this in previous webinars in SCLE, the first thing I do when a new client comes to me is I review the evaluations. A lot of people may not think this, but the evaluations and the data you have for your child is the most important part of your case. And frankly, it's the determining factor whether an attorney can help you get the services you need for your child. So it's a double-edged sword. The evaluation could be helpful, and oftentimes it is, but sometimes it could be harmful for your case, your argument to get certain services. So the evaluations are critical. So we figured it'd be a good opportunity to spend, roughly an hour talking about the evaluation process. So, so these are the topics. The first thing we're going to go over is when should you request an evaluation if you suspect that your child requires some form of special education. When should you request an updated evaluation for your child who already receives special education? When is the district required to evaluate your child? And how do you request an evaluation? There are specific rules you have to comply with when you make the request. Now, you think, Nick, what rules are there? Why is it so difficult? You'd be surprised. You'd be very surprised. So, Taylor, we're going to move on to the next slide. So, first question that comes to mind is, Nick, I'm a parent. I believe my child may need some special education services. When should I request an evaluation of my child? That happens. I get that question frequently from new clients and established clients. First, I always tell clients this, the or parents, you and your spouse, or if it's just you, are the leading experts on your child. There is nobody in the world who knows your child better than you do. So, as the child's parent, if you see that your child is exhibiting some signs of a deficiency, you'll be the best person equipped to notice that. You may not understand the scientific reasons behind it, sure. Heck, I don't even understand it sometimes. But you can identify when your child's exhibiting signs of something. It's up to you to make that call. Now, in order to qualify for special education services, this is what's required by federal law. This is what's required by state law. Your child must be classified as one of these 12 classifications. Now, of these 12 classifications, you need to see if your child shows any signs of these. So I'm going to go through them now. A specific learning disability, it's the most common and the most frequent way this is classified is in the case when a child has been diagnosed with dyslexia or shows signs of a potential diagnosis of dyslexia. So if you see that your child is having a hard time writing or reading certain words, you should have your child evaluated, as it could be a form of a specific learning disability, which for all intents and purposes is frequently defined as dyslexia. It could also be dysgraphia, your ability to hold a pencil. This really goes towards, is there something is your child struggling with his or her ability to learn? But you really can't pinpoint the reason why. Does your child thrive in one subject, but when you look at another subject, it's like, that was me. Look at my report card. It was like, social studies, earth science, gym. There was a grade for lunch. I'm sure that would have been a straight A. But then looked at math and science. My grades were terrible. Turns out I had a learning disability for math. So you have to look at your child's baseline, and is there something that strikes out to you? It's something that stands out. Unfortunately, it may be a specific learning disability. Now, another health impairment, it's is there a condition that your child has that your child's already been diagnosed with that you think may lead to a potential deficiency with their education? That's the easiest way I can describe it. So I've seen this come up with students who unfortunately have been diagnosed with leukemia, where it's not necessarily a learning disability, even though it's a chronic illness, and it's not necessarily a learning disability. But that type of diagnosis could affect other domains or other areas of learning for your child. Does your child struggle with chronic fatigue? Does your child have asthma? All this may not appear to be a learning disability, but it can raise signs that, or it could lead to certain impairments. If your child has chronic fatigue, it's not necessarily a learning disability, but it sure as heck would affect your child's ability to learn. So that's something you have to keep in mind. The autism spectrum disorder, if you believe your child has signs of is presenting with signs of autism, you should get your child evaluated as soon as possible. Now, in my experience, children who are diagnosed with autism can achieve social and academic success. They just need the additional assistance. Now, there are numerous signs of students with autism or that may present with. It's a little bit more difficult to identify it when your child is younger. But if your child's, you know, 12, 13 years old, the signs may present themselves more clearly to you. The most common symptom is excessive fixation on one particular topic and the lack of pragmatic social skills, meaning one's ability to communicate with the other, not the functional, like moving your mouth and your tongue, just how you conversate. If you notice those signs, you should get your child tested and get your child evaluated. Visual impairments, if a student unfortunately has lost their vision, they may require a visual aid or a visual processing evaluation to see to what extent that's occurred. Deafness is pretty self-explanatory. A hearing impairment, a lot of clients get that confused with deafness. A hearing impairment is how you process sounds. It's not that you can't hear, it's that you may process sounds differently than your peers. So if you notice that, if you have three children and one of your children may not, and I know most kids don't listen, but if you are seeing that one of your children may not be able to process certain sounds, songs, you should get them tested for an auditory processing evaluation. Deaf blindness is both deaf and blind. An orthopedic impairment is the easiest way to describe this would be like if a child has scoliosis and it may not be on its face a learning disability, but it would affect their ability to learn. So something, a bone disorder, you should get your child tested for special education. Traumatic brain injury is an injury to your brain that impairs your cognitive functions. So it could be considered a concussion. So if your child has recently got concussed in a sporting event and you're noticing a different level or a different level of education from your child or social level from your child, you should consider getting evaluated for special education. There's also, I believe I glanced over emotional disturbances. I was looking for it. I was like, where the heck is emotional disturbances? Emotional disturbances is an archaic term, and it surprises me that New York State has not changed this terminology. But emotional disturbances simply refer to anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar personality disorder, mental health impairments is what emotional disturbances are. And multiple disabilities is sort of like a catch-all, where if your child presents with symptoms of speech language impairment and may also present with symptoms of dysgraphia, having a hard time holding and writing with a pencil, your child would be with multiple disabilities. So, for those of you who may not know, when I was a child and I had an IEP, my classification was multiple disabilities because of the specific learning disability, the inability to write, and inability to speak. So, I would be multiple disabilities if I was still a child. So, the key conclusion here is you need to look at your child and look at your child honestly. Does your child present with symptoms that may lead to the necessity of special education services? And again, no one knows your kid better than you. No one knows your kid better than you. So, Taylor, we're going to move on to the next slide. So, how do you request an evaluation? So, let's kind of go through the timeline. So, your child is struggling in math, in English, writing, reading, social studies, science. Your child's a B to an A student, but with math, he can't seem to understand. He's having a hard time grasping it. He may have a specific learning disability in math. So when that comes up, what you need to do is send an email to either your school principal, your school teacher, or someone who's referred to as the CSE chair. CSE chair. C as in Christopher, S as in Sarah, E as in Edward. That stands for the Committee on Special Education. You make this written referral to either of those people, and all you have to do is Google New York City Department of Education CSE chair, and then the name will pop up. I'll use Albany. It's an easy example. Albany County, Albany County City School District CSE chair. Just Google it. You'll get the information. If the email is not public, make a phone call. I am the parent of John. He's a student. I want to make a referral to the CSE. Can I have the CSE chair's information? No problem. They'll give you the email. You put this in writing. So federal and state law require you to make this recommendation in writing. If you speak to your teacher, the teacher's not going to do it, or they're going to forget. You have to make the referral in writing. You can do what I do, which is like a fancy letter with a letterhead. You can also just send an email. Dear CSE, hi CSE chair. I'm Joe Schmo. I'm the parent of Johnny. Uh, I'd like to refer Johnny for the following evaluations. Okay, that's all you really have to do. Now, what must be in that email is you need to obviously put your name, obviously put your child's name, put your child's date of birth, put where your child goes to school and your child's grade. My child Johnny goes to the school. Johnny's in first grade. Johnny's date of birth is February 28th, 2024. And my address and phone number is as follows. Okay. Now, when you're making the request for the evaluations, you do have to explain, very briefly why you're making the request. So, hi, I want my child to receive a speech and language evaluation because I believe my child has difficulty speaking. For example, he has a hard time with his T's. He has a hard time with his D's. I believe he stutters a lot. I believe he slurs his words. And I believe this has presented itself in the classroom. You just explain to the who's ever receiving your email the basis for why you're requesting the evaluation. Now, you may ask me, Nick, why do I have to do that? Now, you're not really supposed to have to do that, but in my experience, you got to tell the school district why. I want Nick evaluated for speech language because Nick stutters his words. And then we'll proceed to the next step. Now, the easiest way to connect these dots is you should also refer to communications that you've had with your child's teachers about the deficiency you want evaluated. So let's say my parents, when I was a kid, they're making a referral. The parents go, "Hi, Joe. Hi, CSE chair. Joe, I want Nick evaluated for speech and language impairments." Maybe the principal goes, "Why?" Well, I spoke to Nick's teacher, and all of Nick's teachers say the same thing as me. He may speak too fast. He may stutter his words. He may slur his words. You know, I believe he has a speech and language impairment. And then you get your evaluation done. That should usually be it. Most school districts don't really put up a fight unless the type of evaluation you're requesting is so unique and it may be, you know, an expensive one for them to do. It, oftentimes they won't give you a hard time as long as you set the basis. Okay. Now, Taylor, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So what happens after you make the referral? So you follow the webinar. You go, Nick said I have to send the email to the CSE chairperson. I Googled the CSE chairperson. I got the CSE chairperson's email. I sent the email. I explained why I want my son or daughter evaluated for XYZ, and I explained why. I followed Nick's webinar, and I got a response from the school district. So what's that response going to be? So the school district, 9 out of 10 times, will send you what's called the evaluation consent form. So what's good about the special education process, and actually most evaluation law in the country, is that the school district can only evaluate your child with your consent, not just your verbal consent, your written consent. You have to consent to the evaluation. Okay. So they'll send you the evaluation consent form. And remember, these evaluations are free. You will not have to pay a dime for the evaluations the school district does for your kid. If you consent to an evaluation and the school district sends you a bill, you should call a law firm to have that challenged. Okay? You are not you are actually, it's in the law that the school district's supposed to pay for it. They can't there's no misinterpretation. School district pays for it. Sometimes there's disagreement over evaluations you do privately, but that's a whole other issue. But any evaluation done by the school district is free to you. Now, there are standard evaluations that the district will do. These are what's required by the district. So you say, "Hey, I want to refer Nick to the CSE process. I think Nick has issues with his speaking. I think Nick struggles with his reading. Nick struggles with his writing." The school district will send you the basic evaluations. These evaluations are good, but every child who goes through the process gets these evaluations done. But these evaluations are very good. This includes the social history, the psychoeducational evaluation, the classroom observation, and a physical examination. So the social history is not really an assessment, and it's not really an evaluation. It's more so uh, some professional at the school. It could be the CSE chair himself. It could be a guidance counselor. Will simply sit down with you. Tell me about your son. Tell me about your daughter. They'll ask you some questions. It's a pretty standard set of questions, but that should take no more than an hour. It's a pretty standard set of questions. The idea of that is they want to know the background about your child. It's the social history. So it can even ask pretty interesting questions. Were there any difficulties in delivery? Was your child delivered on time? Was your child of a average weight and size when your child was born? Like they go way back. So be prepared to maybe answer some difficult questions with the social history, but it's pretty standard, and these are usually pretty good. The psychoeducational is like a combination of a psychological evaluation and an educational assessment, where they look into deficiencies that your child may present with, and also how your child is doing in school. It's a pretty wide range. I mean, they test for IQ, they test reading, writing, math, and a bunch of different assessments. There are standard ones that are done, and it's very detailed. And the psychoeducational is probably the most important evaluation. It's gonna the IEP is really supposed to be based off the psychoeducational, but it's a very detailed process. It's a very detailed evaluation. The classroom observation is usually the guidance counselor sitting in class with your child and observing your child in class. They may observe potential behavioral concerns. They can observe certain subjects where maybe your child is being distracted more or less. Uh, Maybe when a certain teacher comes in, your child just kind of disassociate. Like these classroom observations are usually pretty good. The physical assessment or physical examination, pretty standard, making sure that kind of gets into any non-academic but more physical impairments. Now, in addition to these evaluations, you can also request specific evaluations for your kid. So to be clear, when you make the referral to the CSE, the school district is going to do the social history, psychoeducational, classroom observation, and physical examination. You, as the parent, can also request anything you want. Anything you want. But again, you have to state the basis why you're requesting. Okay. So, what are the other types of evaluations you can request? Speech and language evaluation, for one. Again, how how does your child perform with speaking and comprehension? Are there pragmatic social concerns, such as how your child conversates with others? Is there a mechanical concern, how your child enunciates words and puts words together when they speak? The social, the speech and language evaluation will go through that with you. A sign language fluency evaluation. Maybe your child uh, is uh, is deaf and or is suffers from deafness, and your child has to speak with sign language. An evaluation can test how your child's doing with that. An occupational therapy evaluation. How is your child's mechanical skills with holding things? So for me, my handwriting skills weren't good, so I probably got an occupational therapy evaluation, right? So I kind of test to see how your child navigates things with their hand. That's kind of the best way to describe it. Physical therapy evaluation. Do you notice that your child has difficulties walking? Does your child have difficulties with balance? Does your child appear to be weaker on one side and stronger on the other? That would be a physical therapy evaluation. Functional behavioral assessment. There are certain times where functional behavioral assessment has to happen. That could be a whole other webinar by itself. A functional behavioral assessment is that you believe your child demonstrates with certain behavioral concerns in the classroom, such that an assessment needs to be done to identify certain triggers, words, phrases, people who could have a cause your child to have a flare up. That's what a functional behavioral assessment is. It's somebody sits in the classroom, observes your child, and says, "All right, when Nick, this was probably true, but when Nick had math class, Nick would just, start crying," which is still the case to this day. So they would do that in the functional behavioral assessment. These are usually pretty good. Assistive technology evaluation. Are there devices that your child can benefit from that will allow your child to have equal accessibility to her education? Okay. This could be headphones. This could be a laptop. This could be a specific type of pad or a larger screen, a larger font, audiobooks, a tape recorder for the classroom. Any type of device that you think your child could benefit from would be in the assistive technology evaluation. Another pretty easy, straightforward example would be audio textbooks for students who are blind. Braille, that could, you may not think, but that's a type of technology. Braille books, Braille assignments, Braille examinations. That's a technology that could be discussed in the assistive technology evaluation. Okay. Visual impairment evaluation. If you believe that your child is struggling visually, you can get evaluated to determine the severity of that. Then you have the standard autism spectrum disorder evaluation. Now, what you need to do is when you make this request, I want my child to receive a speech and language evaluation. The school district should send you the written consent, and on the written consent, will probably say speech language evaluation. Sure. What you do is you sign it and you email it back to whoever sent it to you. Email it back. Okay. Then after that, the school district has 60 days to finish and conduct the evaluations. 60 days. So make sure you count. All right, 60 days from today is XYZ date. This evaluation needs to be done by this day. If the evaluations are not done, you should speak with an education attorney to explore your options. Okay. Now, I guess this is kind of obvious, but make sure that you're consenting to the evaluations that you requested. So if you requested a speech and language evaluation, but they're sending you an occupational therapy evaluation, that was probably just a mistake. Just say, hi, I'm not. Can you just resend me a corrected one? And then the school district will probably send you the correct evaluation consent form. Okay. But make sure you read it. First, easiest bit of advice attorneys can give their clients or individuals is always read something before you sign it. So make sure you read the evaluation consent form before you put your signature on it. Okay. So the next one, Taylor, next slide. Next question I get frequently is, are districts required to evaluate your child? The answer is yes. Now, the school district has a requirement, and the requirement is by state law and federal law, that the school district must evaluate your child in all areas of suspected disability. So to kind of bring this full circle, remember in that PowerPoint slide where I discussed when you make the referral, you have to state why you're making the referral for the evaluations. This is why. It's for the Child Find Act. If the district has a reason to suspect that your child may have a form of disability, the school district is required to make the evaluation. They are required to. Now, this is usually pretty straightforward sometimes. But if you put in an email, here's why I want my child evaluated. Here's what my child presents with. Here's what I heard from his teachers. I want my child evaluated. They have to evaluate your child. Obviously, send you the consent form, you consent to it, they evaluate your child. They have to evaluate your child. Now, there's also a burden on school districts to preemptively reach out to you to discuss with you whether you want an evaluation of your child. You're not really supposed to be the one taking those first steps. The school district's really supposed to meet with you and say, "Hey, mom and dad, we think Nick may need a speech and language evaluation. Would you agree to that?" They're supposed to do that with you. The reason being is, how are parents supposed to know there's medically something going on beyond their ability to just observe their child? It's it's not a fair burden to expect parents to make the first step. Some school districts say no, but the law is clear. School districts are supposed to take the preemptive measures to ensure that each child is being evaluated. Now, what triggers this burden, like unquestionably, is that email. Is that email to the CSE chairperson? At that point, there's no more arguments. CSE chairperson, I told you that my child needs an evaluation for these reasons. That triggers the Child Find Act requirements. Okay. Now, what usually triggers it is the teachers probably observe potential symptoms in the classroom, and then the notice is given out. But yes, school districts are required to evaluate your child, and they're supposed to reach out to you first. Now, obviously, they can't evaluate your child without your consent, but they're supposed to ask you for your consent and discuss the reasons why you're making the referral. So we're gonna move on to the next slide. So the next portion is pretty straightforward. So if your child currently has an IEP, you've gone through the process, you made that first referral, you watched my webinar and you followed the guidance, you got the evaluations done, you had a great CSE meeting, you have a wonderful IEP, but you want to get additional evaluations for your child. Maybe there are symptoms that are presenting themselves for the first time. Maybe there are symptoms and you're not really sure what causes them or what that could be. And you want an updated evaluation for your child. What do you do? So simply follow the same process as before. Your child has an IEP, your child's had an IEP for a year, you want new evaluations, just simply reach out to the CSE chairperson. In an email, dear CSE chairperson, as you know, I'm Nick's parent. I want Nick to be evaluated for XYZ. Please send me the evaluation consent forms. Okay. Now, there are certain assessments and evaluations that the district is required to perform. So, one that not many people know about is called a vocational assessment. A vocational assessment is when your child turns 12, the district is supposed to sit down with your child and learn your child's interests and potential careers that they would like to pursue once they get to college. The idea is you want to find out what your child is interested in and maybe help your child get there. That has to be done once your child is 12. So going from 11 to 12, and the district hasn't scheduled a vocational assessment, email the district. I want a vocational assessment. I watched Nick's webinar. I want a vocational assessment. Okay. Now, the other portion that districts are required to do is that the district is supposed to evaluate your child every 3 years. It's called a triannual assessment, where every 3 years they sit down with you, the providers, and they do a new evaluation. Now, I'm of the opinion that 3 years may be too long. For children of a certain age, they kind of hit a baseline. But for the highly developmental years, like between 5 and 10, a child for how they are when they're 5 compared to 6 could be drastically different. So I do encourage parents to at least seek an evaluation once a year. If the district says no, call a special education attorney. They can help you out with it. But I would probably advise, or recommend that you consider evaluating your child every year, especially in those highly developmental stages, and especially if your child has a cognitive impairment, because you want to see that progress. You want to see how your child's developing cognitively. Now, if your child's 13, 14, 15, you kind of hit a baseline there. You know, obviously the child matures, but like you hit a baseline. But from 5 to 10, I would consider evaluating your child every year, and you can make the request. That's what I would probably. That's what the guidance would be. Now, for now, why would you do that? Why would you evaluate your child every year? If you evaluate your child every year, you can see if the services that you have in the IEP are actually working. You want to see if they're working, because especially if there are impairments, and again, your child's in that developmental phase, a year of bad services and a year of regression can really set your child back. So I say the district's paying for it, get it done every year. But then there's also the balancing act of you don't want to, take away too much time away from your child. You want your child to be a child, play, hang out, but you got to strongly consider that. I would also recommend if your child's going from pre-K to kindergarten, I'd probably get an updated evaluation. Again, let's just see where our child's at. Let's just see. Are the pre-K services we got, did that work? And also the services that you give a pre-K student are very different than the services you would give a kindergarten student. So you wanna I would probably ask for an evaluation when you're going from pre-K to kindergarten. Um, you should I would consider that. So, but it's really ultimately up to you. If you want the evaluation done or an updated evaluation, make the request. And again, it's something that could happen is, let's say if your child, presents with symptoms of something else, you should have that evaluated and look into. If your child um, goes through something traumatic and you want your child evaluated for any mental health impairments, you got to be proactive. You have to be proactive with your child. And again, I cannot emphasize that enough. That developmental phase between 5 and 10, you have to monitor your child. You have to monitor your child. Okay. And we can move on to the last slide, Taylor. In conclusion, the districts are required to assess your child in all areas of suspected disability. This is an affirmative obligation on the district, meaning the burden does not fall on you. However, districts often fail to refer children for IEP services when children display signs of a classified disability. So, unfortunately, it ultimately does fall on you. It's not supposed to, but it does. As your child's primary hero and advocate, you have to proactively seek these evaluations for your child. Lastly, if the district refuses to conduct an evaluation of your child, that is considered a denial of FAPE. And you can file a due process complaint to have an impartial hearing officer order the district to conduct the evaluation you requested. If you have any questions about that process, you should speak with a special education attorney. And with that said, I believe we concluded the webinar.
We will now open the floor up to any questions. If there are any questions for Nick, please submit them via the chat so I can send them over to him. In the meantime, there is one question that I'll send over, Nick.
Okay. So the question, it's a pretty good one. How is the process for new parents the same and different between special education evaluations and 504 request for evaluations? It's really this. It could be the same process, but it could be different. So what typically happens, and I get these calls all the time for potential new clients, where they'll have their child evaluated for special education services. They'll have a binder of evaluations. You go to the IEP meeting. They say, school district, my child was evaluated 10 times. Each of the 10 evaluations show a need for special education services. School district says no. The school districts do there is they'll recommend a 504 plan. That's not what 504 is supposed to be for. 504 is really supposed to be for physical impairments that do not necessarily affect your ability to learn, but may affect your ability to access your education. So the easiest example is if a child, you know, uh, breaks their leg and they have to use a wheelchair, having an accommodation for a ramp, having an accommodation for a larger desk. That's what a 504 plan is supposed to be. Modifying your child's gym class. That's what 504 is supposed to be. A lot of school districts do is, and it doesn't really make sense to me. They'll try to give you a 504 plan and try to give you some help without going the full 9 yards with the IEP. So in that example, the process is the same. You get the same evaluations done. You just go to the CSE meeting. The school district says, Mom and Dad, I know 10 medical professionals think your child needs special education services, but we don't think so, so we're not going to do it. That process would be the same. You could also, if you have a 504 plan for your child and you're okay with a 504 plan for your child, you could probably get an updated evaluation to evaluate the deficiency that's causing the inability to access the education. So if there's some emotional concern that's affecting your child's ability to access the education. Maybe get that evaluated and let's see how your child's progressing. But that process is pretty much the same. And what typically happens, again, 9 out of 10 times, the the parents want the the IEP. They go through the evaluations. They wait 2 months, and they go to the IEP meeting. The district gives the 504. So that's the same process. The type of evaluations you're getting could be different. If you're just seeking a 504, they could be different. Try to come up with an example. They could be different, but the process is usually the same. So really, just while we're all here, the goal of what you need to do with these evaluations is get on paper the different concerns that you may have for your child. And oftentimes, I'll speak to I'll speak to a client or a potential client. They'll say, Nick, I'm concerned that my child may have a speech and language disorder. And then they get the evaluation, and 9 out of 10 times, the evaluation matches the parent's concern. It's pretty interesting how that happens. But the goal here is what we're doing is you need to look at your child and think about the type of services you think your child needs. And remember, if you're in this fight and you're having a hard time getting the services that you know you need for your child, feel free to give us a call. I'm here all the time. I'm more than happy to help.